Welcome to Robson Radio. We are the official podcast of the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law. The goal of Robson Radio is to tell the story of Western Canada's oldest law school, located on the southwestern bank of the Red River, a stone's throw from the family home of Louis Riel, father of Manitoba. This podcast is recorded on the original lands of Anishinabeg, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oyate, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Each episode will feature an interview with one of our professors, directors, students, or alumni, all of whom make our law school an exciting, relevant, innovative, and transformational place to be. I'm Christine Mazur, and I'm the Communications Officer here at the Faculty of Law. And today, I have with me Dr. Michelle Gallant, one of our professors at the Faculty of Law. She's been here since 1999 on faculty, and her areas of teaching and research focus are on taxation, philanthropy of law, international law, dispute resolution, money laundering, and terrorist finance, which is very exciting to me. And so I'll be asking Michelle to tell us a little about her research and her teaching experiences and her students here at Robson Hall, the University of Manitoba Faculty of Law. So, welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I do have some questions for you. I'm wondering if you could start by telling me a little bit about your research. Specifically, what are your current research projects?
Well, pretty much all of my research touches on money. I call it tainted finance, and I suppose most people wouldn't like the fact that I would include tax in that. But it all sort of centers on, it all has to do with, it's in some way, shape, or form, pretty much touches on money. So in terms of that, a couple of projects right now that we're kind of working on. One of them is to simply look at lawyers and money laundering. So it's just looking for a long time now. There's been this idea that all kinds of folks managing international and domestic financial activity have had some connection maybe with money that's tainted by some connection to crime or some other nefarious thing. So this project simply looks at, okay, what about one of those financial folks can be lawyers? And it's simply looking at what is lawyers' sort of role, contribution, both to this money laundering activity happening and both to sort of resisting the whole realm of tainted finance. So that's one that we're sort of looking at now. And another one is just kind of a neat little one, which you might not think about, but it's to look, we're comparing a Manitoba law with some stuff that's going on in New Zealand. And I realize that sounds a bit funny, comparing a province to a country, but it's simply that in one particular area of law, Manitoba is sort of one of the first provinces to do something. It's called unlawful wealth law, unlawful wealth law, or unexplained wealth law.
Oh, yes.
And so, yeah, Manitoba is one of the first provinces to do that. And New Zealand has done it. New Zealand's sort of a small, for me, manageable jurisdiction to look at. Lots of other countries have too, but it's just to sort of look at, okay, what are the differences and how's this going in terms of a small country, New Zealand, and then comparing that and looking at, okay, what's Manitoba doing in this respect? So those are two things that we're sort of projects looking at now.
Very interesting. And you've been in the media recently, like with different interesting things that are happening, news stories hitting the media, TD Bank in the U.S., for example, and it seems like I'm hearing your voice out there. What are your thoughts on sharing your knowledge with the media, and are they getting it right? Are they understanding what you're saying? And what do you think of these these news stories out there?
Well, I have to admit that tainted finance law is kind of fun. And I guess I sort of got into it, probably 30 years ago. It's kind of a long time ago. And it's sort of been there, sort of been hovering in the background. Not a lot of people were aware of, things like money laundering, regulation, what is this, what is dirty money, what is the financial side of all these things. So it's the sort of this initiative started a bunch of years ago, but now it's kind of become a bit more common currency. So for instance, when we talk about, you mentioned the TD Bank. So a branch of the Canadian bank, actually, you're right, operating in the U.S., was recently fined, and it's fined, you might say it was effectively fined for laundering money. It was a pretty serious fine, like, billions, upwards of $1 billion fine, which is a pretty stiff penalty. We, in terms of sort of the media, there's a lot of, I guess, interest in this, interest in what's going on. Is it dirty banks? There's been a lot of interest, too. In terms of the media, there's a lawyer in BC who had a reasonably pronounced role in laundering money from overseas. So that's kind of given this whole area, again, like folks like to focus on, if there's a lawyer in the news, because it's an elite financial elite, a bank, financial elite, those things can galvanize a lot of interest. So those things have been sort of playing themselves out. As I said, the stuff that I've been looking at, I guess, for 30 years, it's always been there, but nobody sort of has been particularly interested in it, but they're much more interested in it now. So those are two examples. But it also connects to this idea of tainted finance. It also connects to the war. So when you think about what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia, Canada, as much as the global community, has introduced financial sanctions. Well, that's something that sort of touches on this too, right? It's this idea of, look, what's the dirty activity? The dirty activity would be, unlawfully engaging in a conflict. That's the allegation. Canada imposes sanctions, and what part of those sanctions are simply restrictions on financial activity with Russian actors. So even if the Russian actor is my aunt who lives in Moscow, the idea now is that, like, you can't send her. So we have sanctions against activity associated with Russia, and it's a way of pressuring sort of recalcitrant states to sort of stop what they're doing. So that has also given this whole thing a new profile. It's like, wow, what are you talking about? Tainted money, hidden money? Yeah, well, now we're talking about sort of, okay, well, has a Russian oligarch hidden money, say, in Toronto, right? Yeah. And that's sort of given this whole area a much more enhanced, I guess, profile. Yeah. And also, I mean, I'll add this too. Yeah, in Canada, we recently had the emergency use of the Emergencies Act in 2022.
Right.
So when you think about that, so that obviously had national interest. Lots of people's intimately and deeply affected by what was happening, sort of the protest happening across the country, and all as well, a lot of folks deeply affected by the use of the Emergencies Act. But if you look at what they actually did in using the Emergencies Act, the particular power that they used was to tether people's finances. So that also, it's sort of like, wow, all of a sudden it's like, what is this? My local credit union is sort of says I can't access my bank accounts, or and that was basically, that's the area of law that I'm interested in. It's harnessing folks' finances for that reason. So that gave it this whole, when you talk about, well, are we forfeiting people's bank accounts? Are we saying, you can't have your bank loan? All of the tackling the money. That was exactly the way in which we dealt with, under the Emergencies Act, tried to stop things, was to tether people's finance. Right. So that certainly gave things a whole different profile. I mean, when you think, even when you think about something like Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin's been around forever. Yeah. Since it was not forever, like it is a novel currency. But when you think about Bitcoin and the Emergencies Act, right? One of the things people were talking about was, well, okay, are we funding this? Can we seize, digital currency, right? And that would be, why would you want to seize digital currency? Well, the idea was it was funding something that had suddenly become, with the declaration of the Emergencies Act, an illegal act. And so that, again, that sort of gave this whole idea of digital currency, Bitcoin. Is it secret? Is it anonymous? A whole national profile because of its use and because of the relevance of Bitcoin and digital currency and the attempts to seize that, all in the context of the Emergencies Act. So,
right. And you were quite involved in a recent report on that particular topic?
Sure, yeah. I had the privilege of serving on the, there was a public order emergencies commission. So I had the privilege of being one of there was a cluster of scholars who were involved. I think we were 5 from across the country, and I had the privilege of being one of those. Right. So being intimately involved with that, which was just a wonderful, like I said, it was wonderful to be involved. It was wonderful to sort of follow. Yeah. And so I can't say we were responsible. We weren't responsible for the decision, or so whether you like it or not, that wouldn't be part of what we were actually hired to do or engaged to do, was to try and make sure that those proceedings were shaped by research. So that Public Order Emergencies Commission, it was simply, whenever we use the Emergencies Act in Canada, once you've used it, you have to establish a commission to investigate that use. So it's sort of saying, okay, so once it's been invoked, that you have a year, so you have 60 days actually to create a commission, and the commission's central function is to determine, to look at that and analyze the use of that. And it's a way of creating accountability.
Right.
So I was, like I said, along with a couple of other colleagues, was fortunate to be involved in that. And one of the reasons, I suppose, that they asked me was because I would talk about like finance, right?
Yeah.
Going after, as I said, the instrument was to forfeit people's stuff, or at the very least, even if they didn't forfeit, meaning permanently take people's resources, that what they did, that methodology was to say, look, to go after bank accounts, to go after property and finance, and to say, no, that's tainted by this association with the protests. So that would have been my connection, sort of the reason that I had that privilege of being involved with that.
Very exciting. And I'm wondering, what drew you to pursue this area of research focus in the first place? What was the sort of the compelling aspect of this? What caught your interest way back? Was it as a law student or as a professor already?
No, I guess, well, I don't guess. I know that my PhD centered on some of this, so my doctoral studies did. But if you ask me why did I do that, it's because before doing doctoral studies in this area, I actually did a master's in, like, you might say it's in mediation, it's in dispute resolution.
Right.
But my master's degree was very theoretical. And by the end of it, I just remember thinking, I cannot live with another, I can't hear the word post-structuralism again, like post-structural theory, I can't deal with this. And it was really rich, it was interesting, like monopoly theory, theories of professions. And so I did finish that work. But while I was doing that, there were some beginnings of developments here in Canada, and the beginnings of developments in Canada where they were beginning to talk about global money laundering was sort of beginning to be talked about.
Right.
And there was the early echelons, I suppose, in the States, they were beginning to think about using civil proceedings to take the proceeds of crime. So those developments were happening when I was doing my master's, and I started to look into it, but I was committed, I had to finish the theoretical project. But then when I applied to do my PhD, by then I had started to engage more fully in this idea of international financial regulation, tainted financial activity, money laundering, global norms, which was much more riveting because it just was. It was a new area. It hadn't been mined. I had no idea that it was going to become this important, or that its sort of profile was going to change. So when I had written my proposal to do doctoral studies, I sort of drew on this stuff that I was learning, and it sort of flourished since then. And I do remember coming back. It's funny because I remember one particular slice of what I do is to look at something which is called civil forfeiture regulation. And that's basically just suing someone for crime as opposed to holding them to account in a criminal court.
Right.
And so I think it was 1998, I came to a conference in Canada and I was talking about, there's this stuff they're doing. They're doing this in the States. They're forfeiting people's assets for involvement in crime. Like I said, a civil process. They're starting to do it in England. So Tony Blair started to do this in 97.
Okay.
He talked about two things, about civilly using civil recovery, so using civil proceedings to take people's tainted finance. He was also talking about taxing the proceeds of crime, which I thought was interesting too. But it was starting there, and I came to Canada to do this presentation at a conference, and the conference was in Ottawa, and I remember this distinctly saying, look, I'm talking about this stuff, and I said, it'll never happen here. So Canada was part of some different pieces that were going on globally, but not this particular slice. And I remember that, and I said, because we have I called it then, I said a high rights culture, and I said, I can't imagine with the Charter of Rights and entrenched freedoms that we will actually move in this direction. And I was so wrong, as I've been wrong about so many things since, because shortly thereafter, in 2000, Ontario said, look, we're trying this, it's remedies for organized crime, exactly the thing that was happening in Britain and the States, and then Australia and New Zealand suddenly was happening in Ontario. So I was really wrong, which is fair enough, but it's flourished, right, under domestic. Now every province has this instrument that I, in 1998, said will never happen because it causes too much tension with Canadian entrenched rights.
No, but
so
never say never, right?
Exactly.
So I have a question about, have you seen any changes in the legal system since you started working in this area and the impact. But I think we've already talked about how you're being, because of your research and your work, you're being invited to comment and to explain things about this area of the law by the media, and then you're asked to sit on that panel and to share your knowledge. So your work seems to be having a very material impact on life in Canada. Are there other examples of publications? For example, there's I want to read out some of the titles of some of your publications. Taking Money Seriously, Some Provincial Pieces of a Global Strategy, published in Dirty Money, Financial Crime in Canada, 2023 publication. It is out there to read. It's from McGill Queen's University Press. Tainted, Using Anti-Money Laundering Terrorist Finance Approach to Harness a Convoy, published in Criminal Law Quarterly. Very exciting. Transnational Crime, Property and Civil Forfeiture, which was published in Transnational and Cross-Border Crime, Canadian Perspectives, in 2022. Very recent, very exciting publications, very Canadian, on tainted money and transnational crime. Very exciting topics. So can you talk about what you've seen and how the very material impact your research has been having?
Well, I guess I would start by saying the one that's even, I guess, more recent than those, because I don't think it concludes the end of December, is, again, I had the privilege of being involved in a second national commission, and that was the public inquiry into foreign interference.
Oh my.
So that one closes, I think, the end of December. But even in the context of that one, again, I'm sure one of the reasons I was invited to be sort of part of a panel, a public policy development panel towards the end of those hearings, was, again, to sort of talk a little bit about the money piece. So the extent to which it was possible for any kind of sort of foreign agent. It doesn't matter if your foreign agent is Russia or whether your foreign agent is like a company that's located in Australia that wants to sort of influence public policy here. But of course, one of the ways you do that is through funding, right? It's through kind of moving the money in it, and to the extent that you can move that money in covertly to influence something. So you can be a foreign actor, right? I mean, lots of foreign actors are involved in Canadian politics, but they're more, we consider them to be benign.
Yeah.
But the whole inquiry was about foreign interference, and foreign interference is actually secret, so it's covert interference. So, China can come and say, look, we would like to do this and contribute to our public policy, as long as it's open, right? There's no real interest, there's no problem with open. So anyway, in terms of the research dimension, one of the pieces of this has been, well, what about covert?
Yeah.
So interference is covert.
How do you identify it?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and that's why. And my answer to that is, well, with extreme difficulty, right? You can't, right? I mean, somebody said, they said this about 40 years ago, like, a dollar has no smell, right? A dollar's a dollar, a dollar. So whether the dollar is from me as a malign foreign actor who wants to make something happen that's against Canadian policy, or whether I'm a benign actor, or whether I'm a local actor, right? It's hard to tell. It's hard to follow the money. It's hard to know, right? Mm-hmm. But if you look at sort of the impact of some of the research that's been done in this area, including my own over the past 2 years, you will see things like in sort of now in the foreign interference in the legislation, it will talk about, okay, we need regimes that sort of say, look, if you're a corporation, we have to sort of know who owns the corporation, right? More information about corporate activity, who the ownership is. And I say that dimension, so this is about transparency. So when you ask what's some of the impact of some of this research we've been doing, some of the research, including the foreign interference, including touching on terrorist financing, all of these areas, some of the research has sort of emphasized this point that we need to be more transparent. So in order to hide those dollars, financial activity needs to be more transparent. And one of some of the vehicles that are less transparent would be a corporation has never historically been transparent. What do I mean by that? I mean that it used to be that I could incorporate a corporation I own it,
Yeah.
but I could sort of hide behind that corporate identity. So you wouldn't know that I was the puppet master sitting in Australia kind of making things happen in Canada. It wouldn't say, it would just say, especially it says like ABC Canadian Corporation, right? Or ABC, Maple.
Right.
You would never think that there is some kind of somebody somewhere as the puppet master. So
the corporate veil. Right?
Exactly.
You can't pierce that.
Exactly.
Unless.
No, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
You can't.
And some of the research that in this area has sort of is this idea that no, actually, we now have laws that make that corporate entity sort of more transparent. Now it's a little harder for me to be the puppet master. I now have to be, if I'm sort of what's called the beneficial owner, there's actually that you have to keep records of that. You have to identify, you have to figure out, it actually is Gallant as a resident of Canberra who's actually managing this corporation.
Yeah.
So some, those have, and when I say that, I think even, so that's sort of corporate law, but if you look at, Canada has a special Emergency Economic Measures Act, which is the act under which the sanctions against, in this case, the ones that are obvious and prominent are the sanctions against Russia. Those are under the Special Economic Measures Act. And if you look in there too, you will see legislation, you'll see pieces that sort of have a money laundering flavor to them.
Yeah.
So they will be things that say things like, well, financial institutions actually have to, take a look at what you're doing and see if you have these activities. It will say that a foreign actor includes a corporation and you have to know who's managing the corporation. So all I would simply say is that a lot of the research in this area is about transparency, and you see that transparency entering now into the modern national anti-money laundering apparatus. It's entering into sanctions law under the Special Measures Act. It's entering into corporate law, right? Both federal corporate law and provincial corporate law. Yeah. So you do see more transparency, and I think all that transparency is in part a result of research into this area of tainted finance and money laundering and all of that.
Wow. So this all sounds very exciting. What do your students think? Because you teach several very interesting courses. So first of all, you do teach property law, which is mandatory for every first-year law student across Canada to take, right, in their first year. But then in the upper year courses that we offer here at Robson Hall that you teach include global and domestic governance of tainted finance. Philanthropy and the law is another one. The not so exciting sounding is income tax law and policy, which again is quite common across Canada in law schools. But what do your students think of? What are Robson Hall students coming away from your classes with all this?
Well, I'm never sure. I'm never quite sure. I would say that in most of my classes, I'm always pleasantly surprised. Both at the level of engagement, but also with some of the things that they say. So, for example, in one of my classes, I think it was either, was it philanthropy? It was either tainted finance or it was one of the sort of seminar ones. Yeah. And it's when I showed one of my students, the class, something that was talking about an aspect of this area that I won't say anything about the speaker other than I had followed this particular speaker's work. And I'm enlightened because one of my students, after I showed it, said, well, would you have any comments? And one of the students said, yeah, that's misinformation. And that's conspiracy theory. And it was stunning to me. So I learned something because the speaker that I happened to be showing wasn't someone I would have associated that with. Right. And it was interesting because it was like when you think about learning, right? Mm-hmm. So I hope they learned something from what we talk about, but also in that particular instance and in many instances, it's me who's learning. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of just to hear sort of in these classes, especially in Tainted Finance, we talk a little bit about how money moves, and part of modern money movement, of course, is using the internet, right? So I talked about digital currency. Mm-hmm. So in that context, I always find that it's the students actually who have knowledge of these things, who are thinking about them, and who really one of them actually had Bitcoin or a digital coin. So it was really interesting, I think, for all of us to talk about, what does that mean? Have you thought about its use and how did you get it? So in that one in particular, but also, in tax, I always find we do have, so yeah, some of the tax is technical and some of it's kind of dull. But we also talk in tax about policy, right?
Right.
So we've had some great discussions, I think, in the standard tax course just around what is tax, the difference between tax evasion, which is a crime, and tax avoidance, which is not. But we talk about, okay, what about, you're a lawyer, and what about your ability sort of to really help someone avoid taxes to the point that maybe their tax bill is extremely low? What do you think about that? Is that okay? Is that not okay? What's the difference between sort of a moral obligation and a legal obligation? And it's great, I think for me in particular, I have a particular view that's probably shaped by, sort of legions of reading, kind of struggling against, and I live in the academic realm, so I'm not with the practitioners, although some of them come in, and I do work, so I'm familiar with what they do, but it's interesting to hear students' comments and having read a few pieces and to see what they have to say, because it's often very different, a very fresh perspective than what I might have. Maybe my understanding is jaded. One of the interviews I did, we were talking earlier about popular media, and one of the, it was the CBC thing that I recently concluded, and I realized at the end, the person I was talking to, he was sort of saying, well, what can we do about it? Nothing's happened. How can this continue? And I realized that what I was sharing was a very jaded view. I mean, I was laughing about it in a way, but because I was thinking, we've struggled with this, but yet we still have massive money laundering problems. So clearly after that, I was thinking, well, I maybe I should see instead and I should talk more about, well, what are the positive pieces, right? What are the things that that are actually happening? Do we actually have more transparency, right? Even the fact that people know. So when you talk about the students in the class, I find that sort of the more distance there is between me and the students in terms of it's a completely different generation than mine. Actually, I find that they're shaping my understandings more so than I'm. So we try in a classroom to present and then say, okay, what are your views? And I'm always really pleasantly, surprised by the different kind of opinions, their freedom to talk about things, the idea that sort of it doesn't seem that anything is, they'll say anything. And sometimes it's sort of like, well, I think about the other students in the class, but on the other hand, I might say something, but when it comes from them, like when it comes from their colleagues, right, it's a very different dynamic. So I'm not sure what they get from the class. I mean, I think the class reviews are usually okay. They always say thank you, and they're always, at the end of the year, everyone sort of usually says, they'll say something, this was a really fun class or a great class, so I'm really pleased to hear that.
Right.
But I can't tell you exactly. I would just on that note add that one of the really neat experiences I've had with teaching, with classes, for a couple of years, from I think it's 2012, 13, 14, maybe into 15, I taught actually in an LLM class overseas. So it was at the University of London. Yeah. Right. They have a degree in international financial regulation. It's called international economic law over there, and I had participated in. They teach in terms of modules, so I had agreed to deliver a couple of modules over there on it's an anti-money laundering law and terrorist financing law, particularly the global framework. So not so much about Canada, but largely about international law and global regulation that touched on tainted finance. And one of the pleasures of delivering that class was it was students from around the globe. So there was a gentleman from, I think he was from Dubai. And to hear, right, literally hear somebody from Dubai and offer their perspective, right, was different. It was some people from the States. There was a couple of people from one from Pakistan, one from India, somebody from Indonesia, and a couple of Europeans, obviously. But the wonderful thing there was to have these multiple perspectives, like, newly interested students. All of them, I think, were doing LLMs, if not a PhD. Yep. And to just sit there, right, and to talk about the global situations and your view on tainted finance law, and your view on the seizure of these assets, right, or on the role of the U.S., right, or on the role of European law. Absolutely rich environment, right, absolutely fascinating. Yeah. And it was really a pleasure to teach in that space over there. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. There's another course, Philanthropy and the Law, that you teach. And hilariously to me, because I write the stories about student achievement and professor achievement, and about 4 out of the past 5 years, or 4 or 5 students who have won the Canadian Bar Association Philanthropy Charities Law Section Student Essay Scholarship have been your students. Robson Haulers are winning that particular prize every year for their excellent quality papers that they write for your class. Is there something in the water, Michelle? What's going on?
Maybe. Yeah, that's been just a real achievement for Robson.
Yeah.
Because that is a national prize. It's the Charities Law section of the Canadian Bar Association, and I owe my sort of really grateful to Florence Carey.
Oh, yes.
Who's she's a phenomenal tax lawyer here in Winnipeg. So she was tax law, and philanthropy, charities law is usually associated with tax because that's the significant piece. So she comes to talk in the philanthropy and law class, and she actually 5 years or 6 years ago had told us, had mentioned, look, she said there's this prize, and it's for best law student paper, and that's kind of what got us on the road to making the submission. So she encouraged the students to submit.
Nice.
So since that invitation, they've submitted every year since, and they did win. They won 4 to 5 years. I'm pretty sure the year they didn't win, we didn't offer the course of philanthropy law, so we had no contributions. And I'm not dissing there've been the papers from other schools, but yeah, we've been really fortunate to have students. I mean, one of them, he'd written about tax credits. Somebody had written about actually tax for journalism. So there was a new federal entreaty, which is about, it's not so much tax, it's about nonprofits, so identifying journalism, small journalism as a nonprofit, and giving some tax encouragement there. Yeah. But that's absolutely true, and it's been really a delight to have those students win. And there's actually a couple of students who also wrote. One gentleman wrote an extraordinary piece on tax credits or a tax scheme to encourage donations of private shares from private companies. And so it was this more sophisticated sort of analysis of corporate law and shares and how those are treated under tax law. And he actually won for a prize, not that charities law prize, but he won a prize in a different journal. So it was submitted. He submitted that, and so that was a real prize, a real privilege too. And actually, I think this year too, there's not philanthropy and law, but in dispute resolution, there's 2 students who submitted papers to different journals, and both of those have won prizes. So it's a real privilege to have those students in the class, right? Because obviously they're of that particular caliber, right?
Yeah, amazing. So beyond research and teaching, you're also involved in other aspects of the legal community. There's the Law Reform Commission. Do you still oversee the internship there?
Not anymore, no.
Okay.
No. So I was on the Law Reform Commission for 10 years, I think, 9 or 10.
Your biography says you had been an adjunct professor of the University of Manitoba's Peace and Conflict Studies program for a while.
That's great.
Since 2005, are you still?
I still am. Yeah, we had a meeting. We had a meeting actually this week. Yeah, that's a real privilege too. I mean, most of that comes from I got involved with that early on because of my master's. So my master's deals with conflict resolution theory, right? It's about harmony ideology, all kinds of harmony ideology, negotiation theory, mediation theory. So that's why they have this program, Peace and Conflict Studies. And they have a master's program. They also have a PhD program. So I got involved with them early on. So I'm still part of that, or I sit on their board. And I also, so that's sort of, that's their PhD. And I guess over the years, I have been part of a few PhD projects through there. Yeah. So I'm thinking of, there was one a few years ago, it had to do with Jesuit education. So not so much on conflict resolution, but on Jesuit education. So I was part of that. Another one had to do with conflict resolution in Nigeria. So I've been privileged again to be part of some wonderful research works through that engagement.
And I should just note, your Master of Laws was from the University of British Columbia.
It was, yes, It was. Great place.
And I forgot to mention earlier that your law degree, your LLB, was originally from University of New Brunswick, and then you were at UBC for your master's, and then your PhD was King's College?
University of London. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I have to add, because of my last name, I have to add, I don't know why I don't put this in, I do, I guess, that my first degree is from the University of Prince Edward Island.
Oh my goodness.
So some folks have never heard of it, but that's the University in Charlottetown. It's a great space to study. Really nice place to study.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. So peace and conflict, dispute resolution. It sounds like you're a very peaceful person, sort of thing. And then you're studying the exciting topic of terrorist finance. So how do you get from A to B there?
Well, believe it or not, going after terrorist finance is a much more peaceful way to stop it than anything else.
Wow.
So if you can sort of seize, if you have, like I said, almost any activity we do, it doesn't matter, whether it's legal studies, whether it's, starting up a business, everything needs money.
Yeah.
So the idea of, terrorism too, right? And so terrorist financing and terrorist finance law is simply about trying to do a little bit to identify when money might be fueling some terrorist activity, and to try and intercept it or stop it. So that's why I say it's a little more peaceful rather than sort of waiting till the incident has happened and then you have all that chaos and then arresting the perpetrators. Sure, and there's criminal laws, so even if you're attempting to commit or organizing a terrorism act, but part of terrorist finance is simply about trying to identify that money, stop it, and use it, also identify that money as a way of detecting maybe there's something going on here, right? So prevention. So it's
diffusing the bomb before it goes off.
Wow, exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
Well, it's been amazing talking to you about your research, your teaching, and all of. I find it exciting, even though you're like, tax law. No, it's really exciting, and I think that your students must be very privileged to have you as their professor and to hopefully go off and do exciting things as tax lawyers.
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind, and it's a real pleasure to speak with you today, and I'm really grateful and for all the work that you put into putting these things together. So, and for being prepared. So,
thanks.
I'm very grateful.
Thanks so much, and thank you for joining us on Robson Radio, the official podcast of the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Law. Tune in next time for more stories from Western Canada's oldest law school.